Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Intel Brief, where we give you the best of what we discovered this week on some of our previous shows. I know everybody doesn't get to watch every show, and I don't want you to miss any of the really important things. And like always, there were a lot of things that happened this week that you need to know about, things that could impact your life and the lives of the people around you. We're going to start off today. We had Larry Johnson on this week, as we usually do, one of our favorite guests because he has such a great insight. Spent decades in the Intel world working behind the scenes on some things. So he has a really good, number one, he's really connected, but he also has really good insights that a trained Intel analyst typically would have. He's going to be talking here about something that incoming National Security Advisor Mike Waltz had to say about how Ukraine needs to go all in and lower the draft age. Now, when I first heard that, I thought, well, wow, why would he say that? I mean, the war is clearly over. There's no path to Ukraine to win. Adding these people isn't going to help, stabilize the front, I think is the word he used. It's not going to, certainly isn't going to turn the tide. So I wonder why he might do it. So I asked Larry. Now, just in case you might not have seen that clip, I want you to hear exactly how Mike Waltz phrased it.
I will say, the other thing that we're going to need to see is really stabilizing things on the battlefield. And one of the things that we'll be asking of the Ukrainians is they have real manpower issues. Their draft age right now is 26 years old, not 18. I don't think a lot of people realize that. They could generate hundreds of thousands of new soldiers. So when we hear about morale problems, when we hear about issues on the front line, look, if the Ukrainians have asked the entire world to be all in for democracy, we need them to be all in for democracy. And they certainly have fought bravely. They certainly have taken a very noble and tough stand. But we need to see those manpower shortages addressed. This isn't just about munitions, ammunition, or...
Wow, that seems kind of callous to just say that they haven't been all in when that's all they've been. I mean, the whole country has just basically done everything they can, or, well, I guess it's a caveat. It's not the whole country because there has been the elite that's been left unscathed. That often happens in war. But certainly at the common level, there's little that they haven't put in there. In fact, there's by some very credible estimates of late say that the total killed in action on the Ukraine side could be approaching 1 million. And then I was thinking, wow, with that kind of sacrifice already, it seems like the best thing to do would come in and just say, all right, let's negotiate an end to this deal immediately. Let's actually try to get this done, almost overnight. But instead, you had Mike Waltz saying this about, mobilizing a new generation of men from Ukraine. So I asked Larry, what do you think about this? And he had a very interesting take. If you start getting these young kids in there that don't want to fight and already see what happened to everybody who went before them, it's not going to stabilize the front.
Waltz is not a stupid person, and by virtue of his service in the U.S. Army, so he is an experienced officer. He knows better, so I have to view what he said is more of a broader, let's call it negotiating ploy by Donald Trump to position Ukraine for failure, to force them to a decision to end the war. Because Waltz knows that even if they did it today and it was magically, they started getting this, and as you said, by the end of January, 1st of February, you're still not going to see anything to 2026. By forcing this issue with Zelensky, he knows that it's unpopular. So they're forcing Zelensky to basically commit political suicide. And if he refuses...
That's fascinating. I hadn't thought of that.
If he refuses, then Trump is going to say, hey, these guys aren't following our advice. They're refusing to take their responsibility. They want us to put our people and our resources at risk. We're done. I mean, I think there may be that aspect to it. Because like I said, Waltz was what, a lieutenant colonel or a colonel in the Army? He knows better. He knows you just can't grab some snot-nosed 18-year-old off the streets and put a rifle in their hands, and then you're going to all of a sudden have a functioning soldier.
Now, that was on the Monday, the 13th of January. The next day, Zelensky said that, yeah, we ain't doing that. I mean, he's been saying that from the beginning. And he said, would they have rejected calls to lower the age of mobilization? So you see, pardon me, there's already set up some tension when Trump takes office this coming Monday. And what's going to happen after that? So you have the National Security Advisor incoming patently saying, we need to see you all in, and here's how we define it: lowering the draft age to 18. Now, as I said on that same show earlier, there's some very practical things in mind. Even if Waltz actually meant that if they lowered the draft age, it would be literally months before they would have any kind of even marginally trained combat capability be able to show up to solidify the front. And as I show you on virtually every show that we want to talk about on the Russia-Ukraine war, when I show the war map, the line of contact continues to move to the west. It's not static. It's not stable. It's continuing to deteriorate and crumble, moving to the west. So if the Trump administration is saying, hey, we want to come in and get this, because put this in context, within 100 days, because Trump said he wants this long before 3 to 6 months. He was asking a question recently, and he scoffed at it. He said, no, we'll have it done long before then. You had his envoy to the Russia-Ukraine war, General Kellogg, actually put a pin on a target date and say 100 days. So if Zelensky lowered the draft age tomorrow, there's no way that you would get any kind of stabilization within 100 days, which is when he wants it wrapped up. So you see these things, they just can't work together. And so that lends a little bit more credibility to Larry's theory about what the meaning of this was. And now we're seeing it playing out so far. Now, until Trump gets in, we don't know how his next move is, but we see Zelensky has refused to do that. So now then, if Larry's theory proves right, then you're going to have Trump going to be able to come in and say, hey, we wanted to help them out. We wanted to say, hey, if you'll solidify the front, then we can get you a good deal. But because you wouldn't do it, and now we can't stabilize the front, and it's continued to go down, now all we can do is have a negotiated settlement at less than ideal outcomes. And so here we go. And I think that that's the most likely outcome. Actually, regardless of whether they did or didn't do anything with this draft age, that is how it's going to work out. Because as we keep showing you, when you look at the balance of power between the two, and that is also not stable, that is also continuing to escalate on the Russian side and continuing to deteriorate on the Ukraine side. Those trends are continuing to go in, and they're mirrored on the battlefield. That's why it's going in that direction. Not coincidentally, because it's the building blocks, so to speak, that go into making national combat power. If they're going in a good direction, if they're getting bigger and stronger, then all of a sudden you're going to succeed on the front line. And if they're shrinking and going down, then your front line's also going to go in the wrong direction. And so that's just battlefield math. I mean, that's just fundamentals. And it doesn't matter about emotions. It doesn't matter about who's right, who's wrong. There's been in the history sometimes some of those vile and wicked and evil armies that have been on the upside of that calculation. Math doesn't care about morality. It just moves in the direction where the greatest inputs are. Whether that was the U.S. Army in World War II going against a tyrannical Nazi regime, or the Nazis themselves going against the French in 1940, battlefield math doesn't know morality. Just bottom line. And neither will this one. And so Trump is going to be in their face with either trying to negotiate an unattainable outcome, something that's in any way, shape, or form positive for Kiev, or he's going to have to accede to battlefield math, and he's going to have to reach the best deal he can get for them, which won't be good. We've talked about a lot of that. You can go back and watch that whole episode where we've talked about some of the other ramifications of it, but that's where we are right now in terms of that 18-year-old issue. Next thing I want to move to, we had Alexander Mercurius also talking about the Russia-Ukraine war from a different perspective, from the European side. So we just talked about the dynamics between the two warring factions. Well, you have this problem on the West, and we certainly talk about it a lot on this show and expose the realities, is that you have some of the senior leaders in many of these European countries that are not dealing with reality. And in fact, they seem to be going the opposite direction. The more the battlefield exposes the reality of the power dynamics, the more fantasy some of these guys have, to the degree that France and the UK are actually openly talking about having UK and French peacekeepers keep the peace in any kind of negotiated settlement, which they fantasize will be something that is to their liking, something that is to liking of Kiev and Zelensky. But as Alexander explained to us, this is a big gamble.
What they think is, if we can persuade the Americans to step in, for example, we can get them to directly threaten the Russians in some way, that will make the Russians back down, because the United States still overmatches the Russians to such an extent that the Russians will not want to take on the Americans. And that is the gamble. And it is a gamble, by the way. But I think it's a gamble that if you read the newspapers here, if you look at the commentaries, if you look at the discussions in the British think tanks, this is what they always say, that the war is being lost, not because we lack the means to win it. It's because we, and by we, they ultimately mean the Americans, lack the willpower to.
Wow, and as I pointed out to Alexander as soon as he made that comment was, well, one of the fundamental problems with that gamble is this belief that the U.S. can come in and make Russia do something, because I think the phrase he used was that the U.S. still has a military overmatch against Russia, and I pointed out, no, we don't. We actually don't have even a military overmatch. Nuclear weapons, obviously, that's a different category completely. And we have parity in destructive capacity. The numbers actually don't matter. We could both wipe out each other 5 times over. So that doesn't even matter once you get beyond 1 or 2. And so on the short of nuclear war level, the Russian army is somewhere about 3 times bigger than the U.S. Army. Did you know that? Not many people do. It's more than 3 times bigger in terms of the number of people on active duty within their army. Ours is less than 500,000. Theirs is, I think the last I heard, is like 1.4 million of just their army. And even more than just the numbers, they have basically burned off all the chaff through the 3 years of war, and the people who didn't make it, the leaders who weren't good, they've been burned off. And now then, because of painful lessons learned through much blood and loss and sacrifice, now then they are performing much, much better tactically and operationally and strategically, as I would argue, after they made mistakes in all 3 of those realms in the beginning of the war. Now then they're doing a whole lot better. We, on the other hand, might be incrementally better than we were before, because now that we've been focusing on a lot of that, a lot of the drones, we're trying to start now actually incorporating that, but we're moving at a snail's pace where Russia is sprinting out of necessity. That's just how it works. So if we actually had to fight, even on a conventional level, I perceive, and my best estimate without having seen us in action, is that we would get our butts handed to us. It would be ugly. Because it just almost couldn't be any other way, because number one, the Russians have had plenty of opportunity to learn how to deceive and defeat our weapon systems, whether that's from the Stinger, it's from drones, it's from HIMARS, from ATACMS, from our air defense missiles, etc. They've got a lot of practical experience going against electronic warfare and other means to defeat our weapon systems. We don't have any of that. All we get is third-hand stuff or second-hand stuff that we get from Ukraine. I'm sure we're studying a lot of that and trying to incorporate it. But until you actually face it in the field with forces where it's a life and death issue and not a computer simulation or some kind of field exercises, I assure you, in the strongest terms possible, it is a radically different situation. So if you're going to gamble, you need to make sure that whatever you're risking is that actually something that you have. And as I argue in Alexander's commentary there and his framework, this is simple. This is similar to, say, me going to Vegas, mortgaging my house. So I've got like $500,000 in cash. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to go up against seasoned gambling veterans, guys who know what they're doing and have so much more money than I do. But I'm going to come in and I think that I'm going to win. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to gamble. It's not a risk. It's a gamble. It's more than that. But I think I've got, if I roll the dice well, or if I play the cards good, look, all you're going to do, and they're licking their chops. They would love you to do that. They want you to take that gamble because that means that they're going to get all your money. And that's how it is right now. When the West is not recognizing the basic, and we keep going back to this, battlefield math, the fundamentals of war-making capacity at the national level, what we do when we ignore that and say, no, we're going to keep on going and we're going to try to get something better. We're going to try to beat these professionals here who have all of the wealth behind them and all the experience. then we're going to have the same result at a national level that I would have if I went to Vegas on a personal level. They're going to lose everything, i.e., if you make a deal on day one when Trump comes in and is willing to say, look, we're just going to recognize this, the best we can get done right now is just to get the war off the table, just to shut it down and start the process of rebuilding Ukraine, whatever's going to be left, and to improve relations between the East and West, get the gas flow back going again so the economics can improve for the West of the United States, or the West of Europe, I'm sorry. All those things would be beneficial. It would be embarrassing that you can count on the Russians to be tooting their horn and, celebrating. And yes, we defeated the West and all this. And they'll say all kinds of stuff and they'll be lamenting and moaning on the Western side. Oh my gosh, we lost. That'll play out for a few months. And then everybody will be going, okay, what's next? Okay. Anyway, back to life. And that's how, again, there's so many things that go on in life. All it takes is the next thing that hits the news cycle. People are moving on from this. Look what happened after Afghanistan. I mean, that just dominated the news for several months after, but really only several months. Then by the turn of the year, that happened in August of 2021. By the beginning of the next year, people moved on to whatever was next, and they're focusing on other things. And Afghanistan receded into the background, only periodically coming up. And everybody moved on with their lives. That same thing can happen here, because similar to the Afghanistan situation, that didn't cost the West anything other than pride. So it hasn't cost, there's no blood lost. There's no cities been destroyed. No armies have been devastated in the field. None of that has happened. Obviously, it's rubble for the Ukraine side and the destruction of generations of its men, which in some cases will never be recovered. Millions, tens of millions have literally fled the country from when all of this started. Probably most of them will never come back, etc. But that's where we can go. And so it can cause no further damage to the Ukraine side, as absurd as all the things we've done for 3 years are. We can stop the bleeding right now. Or we can say, I don't care about that. And I'm going to just throw the cards on the table and I'm going to put my mortgage on the table and lose it all. Meaning that Ukraine can then be further devastated. It won't be the June 15th line that Putin laid out. It'll be probably the line of the Dnieper River and the loss of major cities. Because here's the thing, Russia doesn't have to, grind out another 9 to 12 months of war to incrementally take all the stuff. Because as I keep pointing out, the fortifications are coming to a close. They don't have very many of them in further depth. So they can't just keep going on methodically and losing increments here and there, because their manpower won't allow it. We've already showed you Julian Rupke, the German media personality, has shown graphically, like with video, that even in some of the good defensive positions, the Ukraine side has lost them, not because they were fought over toughly, but because they didn't have enough people to man them, and the Russians just came in and took them over in some cases. Now imagine if they don't even have good defensive positions, and then things continue to go on, and the morale of the men, the desertion rate will continue to go on. Zelensky says he's not going to bring the 18-year-olds. Ergo, they're not even going to have enough to offset losses. And at some point, this is just how military works. We talk about the math. This other dynamic is a little bit less certain than math, because you don't know where the inputs are. But at some point, methodically, categorically, the thing breaks, and there will be a bust somewhere in the line. And if Russia starts, and if they're smart at all, they'll have an operational reserve somewhere of like 100,000 men, maybe more, just parked, maybe in bunches in several places off the line, so that if there is a breakthrough, they can quickly marshal them, get them up to in large numbers, and literally drive across Ukraine. Once that happens, then you have a dynamic similar to May 1940, when the Nazis broke through the French lines. And they had really tough soldiers, tough lines, et cetera. But once they broke through, it caused a panic. And even these very well-trained troops in the British and French army at the time just melted away, and they just ran to the Channel coast. And at Dunkirk, of course, they crossed the river there. That's what's going to the Channel. That's what could happen here, and it has happened many times in history. And we don't know what can prevent that. Is a good negotiated settlement. We'll see if Trump actually gets that done. Next thing, let's shift over to the Israeli situation and the peace discussions between, the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And we had John Mearsheimer on, the international theorist extraordinaire, one of the favorite guests we have because, he's got such great insights and a tremendous history of being right on a lot of these main issues. One of the specific things we were talking about this is the what next for the region, and especially for Israel, because if it's got the Hamas thing, at least it's going to put it on pause for a while. Then what is going to happen up north with Iran? And of course, the incoming U.S. administration, some are already talking about, hey, we should go back to maximum pressure 2. We should try that again. That worked so well the first time. And so I asked Professor Mearsheimer, if they do that, combination of Israel and the United States incoming administration, if they try another maximum pressure, and then if it doesn't work and they feel like they have to go in with military force against Iran to get rid of their nuclear weapons, can that even work? Here's what Professor Mearsheimer said. What would have been the result in Iran's ability or willingness or desire or ability to actually later on get a nuclear weapon if they had been hit like Israel was claiming that they were thinking of doing?
Well, a couple points, Danny. First of all, Israel does not have the capability to take down Iran's nuclear infrastructure. The United States is needed. Second point is, it's not clear that the United States can do it. There's a reasonable chance we could take down almost all of the nuclear infrastructure that Iran has, but it's not for certain. And the third point, which addresses your question, is that even if we take down that nuclear infrastructure, almost everybody I know, and this includes some very hawkish people, believes that eventually Iran would reconstitute the program and they would end up with nuclear weapons. If Iran is determined to get nuclear weapons, there's no way that the United States can prevent that over time.
That last comment he said there is more important, I think, than may even appear at face value. Our stated objective in the U.S. government across multiple administrations, not just the current administration or even Trump before that, has been no nuclear weapons program for Iran. We'll do whatever it takes to prevent nuclear weapons from falling into the hands of the mullahs. That's been our stated objectives. And the Obama administration tried to accomplish that by having the JCPOA, the so-called nuke deal, where it limited reprocessing capabilities and the amount of fissile material they could have, et cetera. And so it significantly reduced that. And then Trump came in and was convinced by any number of different actors that no, actually pressure is what's going to get them to do that. That's what's going to keep us safe. We need to force them into something that's even better of a deal than what Obama, because it was holes in what the Obama team had done, et cetera. So he got us out of the JCPOA. And of course, logically, rationally understanding, once you get rid of the constraints and you stop giving Iran any of the incentives that would help them, give them motivation to want to go in this direction, they of course went backwards. And now then they have a lot higher reprocessing facilities. They have a lot more. Their centrifuges are greater than they were before. And now then, according to a lot of intel estimates, if they made the decision, the Iranian side, to have a nuclear weapons program, they could have enough fissile material for up to 4 bombs within, I think it's less than 2 weeks, maybe not even that long here. And then a couple of months before they could get it weaponized, et cetera, once they made a decision. They haven't made that decision yet. But these kind of talk and things about this are what's more likely to push them into it. It seems unlikely, very unlikely, that there are any terms that the incoming Trump administration could give to Iran that would make them say, you know what, it's in our interest to do this. We're not going to go to a nuclear weapons, and we're going to have a negotiated settlement that's different than the JCPOA, that's more restrictive. It has something to do with their ballistic missile program, et cetera, because the only possibility of getting that, and it is theoretically possible, let me just say it, but the only way that would ever occur, that they would ever agree to that, is if they got some substantial benefits out of it. See, and that's the part of the equation that nobody in America, certainly in most of the West, they don't want to give Iran anything. They only want to restrict and take. We will get this, you will not get that. That's the extent of it. And and sign here. Well, of course, they're not going to do that. And so if you go on with something that's irrational, then what you're going to end up doing probably is pushing them into a bad direction to where then they feel like their only way to defend themselves is with a nuclear weapons program. And it's, I would, if we were getting into a situation where that was closer, where they were closer to making that decision, I would wager that one of the first things you would see is that they would say, all right, we're just getting out of the international UN agency that has to do with the nuclear weapons, et cetera, because there's still, to this day, there are still some UN weapons inspectors in Iran. I would guess that they would say, all right, y'all aren't doing anything for us, so we're just going to kick y'all out. And then they'll say, we're still not going to do a nuclear weapons program. We just want y'all out. Well, of course, once there is no monitoring going on, now then they can make that decision and nobody in the West would know about it, most likely, until it's already done, until it's a fait accompli. Probably you would see maybe an underground, possibly even an above ground nuclear test somewhere out in the middle of an isolated desert in Iran. And then all of a sudden, everything's changed. If we want to avoid that outcome, then we need to change our negotiating position, and we need to do something that makes sense, that actually has a chance to succeed. And I don't have a lot of confidence that that's going to happen, especially on the Israeli side, because I know that Benjamin Netanyahu, Naftali Bennett, that we've shown on here a number of times, former prime minister, many times wanted to go after Iran. They called him the head of the octopus with all of its tentacles in the Middle East, and they have to go after them. They have to destroy their capability. Well, as John Mearsheimer actually also said in that same episode there, the Israeli side by itself doesn't have the capacity. They have to have the United States to go in there. And together, the two sides could clearly bring exceptional amount of firepower to bear. That could destroy a great many things. But because the Iranians understand that that's always been a risk, they have additional capabilities dug deeper and deeper into the sides of mountains and under the ground. And almost certainly, because they're not stupid, they're going to have capacity that would put those weapons in a place where they couldn't be interjected, so that even if the attack came, that they would still be able to put them together. So that's the risk that we would run in that case. And I just hope that we don't do it. But one of the reasons I worry about it is because Israel has shown this propensity for a long time, even before October 7th, of not being smart about strategy. They're being really good and upfront with brute military power and force, and they've imposed that on the Palestinians in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip for quite a long time. And obviously now then they've almost turned the Gaza Strip into a dust heap and a bloody graveyard all over the place. But they haven't accomplished their objectives, and that's one of the reasons there's a ceasefire now, because they realized, and we had Secretary of State Blinken about 3 days ago openly admit and reveal that Hamas not only has not been decimated militarily, they have rebuilt their strength, which, if you've been paying any attention to anything we've said on this channel from the beginning, you would know that's what we've been warning about, that very thing was likely, given the fundamentals. And so one would hope that Israel won't continue that propensity to ignore basic realities and say, well, I don't care if we can, or it's not likely, I want this, so I'm going to use military force to try to force it into being itself. Because as bad as the situation has been for the region, and certainly for the Palestinian people, with what's happened since 10/7/2023, it would be infinitely worse if it turns into a nuclear exchange and it crosses the nuclear threshold with Iran. So we'll have to see how that's going to work out here. Again, everything really will depend on what happens with the incoming Trump administration, now set for this coming Monday. So lots could change after Monday, and you can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to keep you appraised of all that's going on across all these big issues here. And we'll probably be talking a lot about what's going on in China as well in the new administration. But before we let you go today, just maybe one of the last parting shots from the outgoing Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, wanted to talk about diplomacy, and Gary found this one, and I was going to just talk a little bit about it. We can't play all the sound because it's got music behind it that would get us in trouble with YouTube. There are some things underneath it, but I was asking Gary if he might come on, because he had some really good commentary and commentary on this. Gary, if you could maybe restart that so people can read while I'm talking.
Oh yeah, it's not that it's well, I thought it was fascinating that this man at this late hour thought it was most important that he reminds us about, as he says, look at this, the Global Music Diplomacy Initiative. And he goes on to talk about how important music is. Listen, we all love music, music is important to us all. But for him, in the position that he's in, to come here and tell us how important music is and how it changes the world, when he's in a position that could change the world, and he's saying how music is important, and how I just wondered if something like this isn't what is he doing in the back channels? Is he sending Putin mixtapes through the back channels, hoping because we know he never sat down and talked to the guy, so he thinks he can change this world through this? It's a little heartbreaking that this is what he leans on.
It is. I mean, we're laughing about it. It's kind of funny, but yet at the same time, I mean, here he is himself, featuring himself, riffing on like he wants to be a rock star. And he's talking about it, and he's hyping up this diplomacy initiative, which has produced nothing. And in every area, he has failed utterly. And this is how he wants to go out talking about, yay, global diplomacy. But look at me. Because if you watch this video, you can probably Google it. I mean, there's that section in the middle where you can actually hear him playing and singing and whatever. And, I guess he actually has a few skills. It's kind of funny.
Yeah. Listen.
Gary,
he's a dedicated blues man, Danny. He is. Listen, he can play.
Is. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't bad, really. I mean, honestly, I mean, he may not have a good second career, actually on the charts, but listen, if he had actually accomplished something and gotten a major diplomatic initiative, ended the war with Ukraine or ended the war in the Middle East, or really produced anything of value for the United States, this might be cool. I might be highlighting it and saying, hey, what a great thing this is, guy. He's even cool too, but unfortunately it's the opposite. It's embarrassing, humiliating that after these catastrophic failures and so much bloodshed and so much failure for all of the people, both Israeli and Palestinian, obviously by substantially higher in the Middle East, and all of the Ukrainians, somewhere around 1 million people, and you're celebrating your ability to riff on a guitar at the end. It's embarrassing.
It's such a cringeworthy note to end on. You'd think he would choose another path, but this whole week was filled with cringeworthy moments. You saw how many times Biden came out and wanted to address different aspects of the different departments that he was head of, and it was all a cringe fest, really.
Well, yeah, I guess that's true. And then you had Anthony Blinken earlier. I can't remember if it was last weekend or the first this week, where he had those so-called exit interviews where he said that he had given Ukraine every chance to stand up and stand on its own diplomatically, military, economically, and hope the Trump side doesn't ruin it. Whatever. You had Secretary of State Austin doing a similar kind of thing at the last meeting, et cetera. And then obviously Biden and his farewell address and his last foreign policy speech, which was just a I love me fest. Cringeworthy. Good point. That's what I think that was the best. Sure.
Well, we got a good week next week. We got everybody. We got Colonel McGregor. We've got Matt Ho. He hasn't been on in a week or so. Larry's going to be back talking about some CIA operatives that have been working behind the scenes that are now just coming to the headlines and being revealed as to what's going on. So he's got some insight into what's going on there.
Yeah, and then of course once Trump takes over on the 20th, buckle up, baby, because I think a lot of stuff's going to start happening, and I guarantee you, Daniel Davis Deep Dive, our team will be right on top of it to bring you the latest. So that's it today for Gary and I. Thanks ever so much for coming on, and we'll see you next week on a whole new set of series for Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Amen.